Hey everybody, Mr. Troy here. You know what's refreshing? Learning. Knowledge. And, an ice cold LaCroix. It's time for math with Mr. Troy. Doing a silly dance. Okay, today's video is about number systems. We're going to start with the natural numbers. These are the counting numbers, the first numbers that you learn as a child. Things like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. If I ever want to talk about all of the natural numbers, so that would be the set of the natural numbers, instead of writing them out forever, I can use this symbol to represent all of the natural numbers. The whole numbers are all of the natural numbers, but they also include 0. So a set is a collection of objects, mathematical objects normally in our case. And we use these curly brackets to denote a set. Since we're going to be talking about different types of numbers all the time, it's good to have a shorthand. Now, whole numbers don't really get used that much, so we don't have a special symbol for them, like this special N. The integers are next. If you think about it, the first thing you learn as a kid are 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you learn 0 a little bit later. And then the integers, the negative integers, you learn much later. So the integers are numbers like -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, and 3. And they continue on in both directions. So we throw a little ellipsis or a ... on both sides. Now, the shorthand for that is this bold Z. So we draw a Z kind of with 2 lines in the middle. Next are the rational numbers. Now, you actually probably learned these before you made it to school because someone asked you how old you were and you said, I'm 2.5. That is a rational number. So is 1 1/4, or just 1/3. Move that over a little bit. A rational number is a fraction of 2 integers. Now, you can't put a 0 in the denominator, but anything that can be represented as a fraction of 2 integers is a rational number. So 5/4 or 5/2. But other numbers count for that as well. So 4/1 also counts as a rational number. So 4 is a rational number, an integer, a whole number, and a natural number. 0 is a rational number, 0/10 or 0/pick, whatever you want. It's an integer, it's a whole number, but it's not a natural number. So 0 is these 3, but it's not this very specific one, natural numbers. The symbol that we use for rational numbers is a bold Q. So a Q with that second bar on it. And the Q stands for the quotient. So like the ratio or the quotient. Our final thing to fill in here are irrational numbers. So things like the square root of 2. Now, irrational numbers, this is important, are numbers that have as their decimal part non-repeating, non-terminating decimals. Pi, for example, is another one. You know that pi repeats forever with no pattern, right? So if something is a rational number, it's not an irrational number, and vice versa. Okay, so our next classification of number is the imaginary numbers. Now, imaginary numbers don't fit on the real number line, so we need to make a second axis, the imaginary axis. So we have a real axis, and we have an imaginary axis. Imaginary numbers are things like the square roots of negative numbers. So, for example, the square root of negative 16 is 4i, which, if we want to plot it, goes right here. Other imaginary numbers are things like 2 plus I, which would have 2 parts in the real component and 1 imaginary part, and would be plotted here. And you will learn more about that in this class and also in your next class. Imaginary numbers are a subset of what are called complex numbers, as are real numbers. To be clear, anything that falls only on this line, so for example, pi, that is a real number. Anything that has any imaginary part, whether it's a pure imaginary number like 4i, or negative 2i, or if it's something with a real part and an imaginary part like 2 plus I, those are all called imaginary numbers. The ones that don't have a real part are called pure imaginary numbers. All of these fit under the complex numbers. So the complex numbers include the real numbers and the imaginary numbers. An imaginary number can have a real part, but it cannot also be a real number. The real numbers are the rational numbers and the irrational numbers. And since integers are rational numbers, they're included. And since natural numbers are integers or rational numbers, they're included too. So we mainly talk about either the real numbers or the complex numbers when we're talking in this class. The real means anything that doesn't have an imaginary part, and the complex numbers are anything that do have an imaginary part.